This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to this podcast. Today, we are going to talk about traveling the globe to chase the stars. We have two amazing guests here who have traveled to catch solar eclipses and other amazing things in the galaxy. I'm joined right now by Patti and Gauss Rescigno. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And you're both in Stillwater, Minnesota, right?
Yes.
Which is great. Right. And I used to live in Minnesota for 8 years in Minneapolis there. Wonderful. Lots of opportunities, obviously, to enjoy nature. And Patti, we were talking offline here, and you mentioned that sort of one of the things that appealed to you about where you live is this opportunity to gaze into the heavens without a lot of metropolitan light.
Yeah, that's right. We used to live walking distance to downtown Minneapolis, near the university. The neighborhood was a little noisy, especially once we had kids. And we were both freelancing, so we thought, well, we don't have to be right in the city. So when we were looking for a place to go, we thought we're actually north of the town of Stillwater, between Stillwater and Marine on St. Croix, in Beautiful. What was then a really rural area. And one of the attractions for us was the dark skies. So you can go out on especially a clear cold winter night, and you see the Milky Way. And if we're lucky, we get see northern lights once in a while out here that you wouldn't see, if you were in the what do we call it? The light bubble of the city.
Or in Los Angeles, where I'm from. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Well, so we're starting off all of our podcasts asking our guests the same three questions. So let's start off with both of you, if we could here. What has been your biggest discovery while traveling? Now, this could be a place you've discovered, a lesson about yourself that you've learned, maybe a tip or a trick that you like to share with others. But I'm curious for both of you, what has been your biggest discovery in all your years of traveling?
You want me to go first?
Go ahead, Gauss.
Well, for me, it's been that no matter where I've been, and it doesn't matter what part of the earth, what country, what culture I'm in, people seem to be the same in some ways. For example, being in China, either in Xi'an or in Chongqing in Sichuan province, I remember seeing some old men sitting in a park playing cards together and just joking with each other and just, making fun of each other and having fun. And then I saw the exact same thing in a small town in northern Italy, where, people, they don't even speak Italian, they speak their local dialect, and then they just joke with each other and have fun. And also children playing together, the way children play together, the way old people play together, the way people interact, people put out their laundry in just ordinary neighborhoods. It seems to be the same everywhere. People are very similar throughout the world. That's probably been the biggest lesson for me.
Isn't that fascinating? And I think a lot of people might be surprised about that. They think that we're so different in all of these different countries and cultures, and yet there are some common threads between us. Patti, what's been your biggest discovery?
I want two.
Sure, you can get two. We've got plenty of time here. Our listeners don't mind, do you?
One of them is that money and time spent on traveling is never wasted. And the other one is kind of similar to Gauss's. We lived in mainland China. We were some of the early, adopters. We went in 1981 to teach English, just because Gauss had a major in Chinese and really wanted to go. And I was like, sure, let's try that. But what I really discovered there, at the time, it was still collectivized, communist. People were wearing the blue Mao jackets and called each other and us comrades.
Wow.
But what I discovered was that, and I grew up during the Cold War when we were, taught to fear, communist China and Red China and Russia. But what I discovered was that people just do what they need to do to get by, to be comfortable, to hang out with their family and friends. So I guess in a way that's really similar to what Gauss's big lesson from travel is.
Fascinating. And what would you say, each of you, your favorite place that you've been to so far?
Oh, that's like asking who's your favorite child. That's,
It's an impossible question.
yeah, it is. I could think of a couple of examples. Very specifically, I remember climbing one of what they call the 14ers in Colorado. That's one of the mountains in Colorado that's over 14,000 feet high. And just reaching a ridge and looking over the other side of the ridge and seeing this huge expanse of peaks extending to the horizon. It was just beautiful. And that really sticks in my mind. And other
my
places.
my dad is from Colorado, the west side of the mountain, and we would go back there as kids for vacation. And the Silt Mesa, and as you mentioned, there's just the expanse, the gorgeousness of the landscape and the horizon, and it still sticks with me to this day.
Yeah, that's really sticks out. And there's a couple others I can mention. Of course, the Boundary Waters Canoe areas, and some of the more remote lakes.
Up north there in Minnesota.
They're just beautiful. And also the little towns in northern Italy on Lake Como. In fact, just a couple of years ago, we made a visit there and went on a trip by boat up the lake. From the town of Lecco, we got on a boat and went up along the lake and then stopped at one of the towns. On the lake.
You're from Italy, right?
I'm from Italy originally, yes.
Fantastic.
And northern Italy.
Northern Italy. And in
particular.
It wasn't just that it was Italy. It's like my part of Italy. I felt so at home there, even though I hadn't been there for many, many years, and I never really spent much time there. We left Italy when I was only 9 years old. So.
Wow. Patti, your favorite place?
Okay, I get 3.
Oh, my goodness. Look at you. You're like a reporter with all these follow-ups. Okay, go for it.
Sorry. Well, okay, when we were in China, we climbed a mountain called Huashan. It's considered a sacred site for Buddhists and Taoists. And when we were there, there was no electricity and no running water. And there were a lot of pilgrims who went there, like old country people, including at the time women who had bound feet, would hobble up with their canes to get to these temples at the top. And when we got there, there were gas lights and candles, and it was like traveling back in time. It was like not just traveling across a landscape, but going to a different era. It was like going to the Middle Ages.
Wow.
And it was 75 miles from the city where we were living. And a similar place by the way, Huashan was pretty uncomfortable. There was no sanitation to speak of, so I won't get into that in detail.
We're a family show. Thank you.
Yeah, but sort of similar is Venice because it was constructed with canals before there were cars. There are no cars in Venice, so it has a human scale to it. And at night, during the day, it's kind of like the Minnesota State Fair. It's crowds of people going and looking at the sights and buying trinkets and eating. But at night, most of those people clear out, and it's very quiet because there are no cars. There's no getaway cars. The crime rate is very low, and it's very atmospheric. And you can walk from one end of the city to the other in half an hour. I
found it really enchanting. Absolutely.
Yeah. So my third one is just my home spot, which is the North Shore of Lake Superior and the Boundary Waters. I always feel at home there.
All right. So before we get to chasing solar eclipses, let me ask you our final question here. The next place that you're traveling to?
Yeah. Well, for us, we're hoping to take a trip to Italy in just a few weeks, to go back to northern Italy for Gauss to see his relatives. Since a recent development in our life is that Gauss was just diagnosed with cancer, and
oh my gosh,
yeah. So,
wow.
One thing we said, time and money spent traveling is never wasted, and with the uncertainty of a cancer diagnosis, we just said we need to do this. So health and everything cooperating. That's our next. We're going to go back up to the areas that Gauss was talking about, northern Italy, where his family is from, the lakes like Lake Como, and perhaps some areas north of Venice where he has relatives.
Well, Gauss, my thoughts are certainly with you, and I hope some of that great Italian food maybe give you some sustenance and help beat that thing real quick.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we really found this fascinating, is that there is this total solar eclipse later this year in 2017, August 21st, 2017. It's a Monday, so you may have to take some time off work. But tell us about this. So I heard that this is called, it's being called the Great American Total Solar Eclipse. Have you heard of this? I suspect you have.
Yes, I think that the reason they say that is because if you follow the path of totality, that's a line that you can see drawn on a map that plots out where the eclipse is total. It goes right across the United States from the West Coast to the East Coast.
Is that rare?
That's very rare, yeah. We've had others that cut through part of the United States, but this one goes coast to coast. And so the opportunity for us is to find the spot along that line that has the best chance of clear weather on that day.
So this is a show in all time zones, live in all time zones, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And I think I read where it's 70 miles wide, so 110 kilometers. I mean, as you mentioned, this goes from Oregon to South Carolina. I'm looking at a map now. And on that day, August 21st, the map says that in Oregon, it starts at about 10:19 a.m. You can set your watches now, folks. And then goes over Snake River Valley, Idaho at 11:33, Casper, Wyoming, 11:42, goes over Nebraska just before noon, Missouri about 1 o'clock, Nashville, Tennessee around 1:27, and I hear that's supposed to be really great for viewing. And then over to Columbia, South Carolina at 2:42 p.m. before going off into the Atlantic. What are you doing to be in position? Because I don't see Stillwater, Minnesota on this path for totality.
Well,
we're going to head down towards Omaha,
yeah,
which is not far from where it's total. And then from there, we're going to see what the weather looks like and probably head west on I-80. Lincoln, Nebraska is right on the edge of the path of totality. So from there, we'll see what happens. But.
Yeah, well, we've done this before. Our first solar eclipse was actually, I guess it went through a little part of the United States, like the very northern tier, Montana, North Dakota,
I think.
But we actually, living in the Twin Cities, this was in 1979.
February 26th, 1979.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
We drove up to Winnipeg and in a Volkswagen Bug, my car, which didn't heat terribly well.
Just for that, yeah.
And we just at that point we had to kind of just hope for the best. We had a map that Gauss must have gotten I think he got it from a book published by NASA that showed where eclipses were, and we're like, okay, let's go to this area. And we did have enough information that we could find. We found like a little rural dirt road that was within the path of totality, and we got lucky. The weather was clear, and we saw it. And at that point, we said, "Oh boy, if there's more of these, we're going to go." So we have traveled for others. The nice thing about this one coming up now in 2017 is that with the internet, we have a lot more access to, advanced weather reports, and there are really good maps available online that you can go and zoom in. And so you can find you can pinpoint a spot where there's going to be a road that you can be on. You don't necessarily have to be right in a town. You can, and you can look at the weather reports ahead of time to see, when do you expect the clouds are moving in, or where is it going to be sunny? So we might be in Omaha, or we might be somewhere in Wyoming, or we might be out in eastern Oregon in the rain shadow of the Cascade Mountains.
So do I have this right, Patti Gauss, that this means that for 35 or 36 years, which is, a third of a century, you really haven't been storm chasers, you've been solar chasers, basically.
That's right.
That's correct.
There's some we've missed because they were just too far away or too expensive to get to. But, if I could afford it, I would have got to see all of them. It's really quite an experience.
How many do you think you've seen then so far?
We've seen 3 total. And we saw one called an annular eclipse.
What is that?
A few partials. When annular eclipse is when the way that the sun and the moon line up, the moon is just a little bit too far away, and it doesn't quite cover the whole disk of the sun. So instead of seeing what they call the corona, you see just a complete ring around the sun of direct sunlight in a ring.
Yeah, in a total eclipse, the total disk of the sun is blocked out. And you see, when you look up at the sky is kind of a dark twilight, not completely middle of the night dark, but it's sort of twilight. Then you see this, what looks like a black hole, and then radiating out from that is this gossamer corona of the sun. But in an annular eclipse, because the moon's disk doesn't cover the sun's disk completely, you have to look at it with eye protection. You can't look directly at it. And you see just this ring of sunlight with sort of a black hole in the middle. And because it's bright enough, you don't see that wispy corona.
Yeah, and then that was the annular eclipse we saw was in 1994, I believe, right?
I think so.
Yeah. But anyway, one thing that's important to say is you have to have eye protection.
Right. This is our public safety announcement portion of the podcast, right? You're never supposed to look directly at an eclipse, although if it is at the moment of totality, is it safe then?
Yes.
If it's total, it's safe, yeah.
Yeah.
And the length of totality varies on the eclipse. We saw one in 1991, which lasted about 7 minutes. That was probably the longest one this century. That was amazing.
Last century.
Oh, last century, I should say.
And they called it the eclipse of the century because it lasted so long.
That was the one in Mexico. This one, I believe, is only going to be 2 or 3 minutes of totality. But during that time of totality, it is safe to look at it directly.
And you don't need a telescope, right?
No.
Oh, no, not at all.
You don't need a telescope at all.
And then, did I read where in totality, there are some strange things that can happen, right? I mean, obviously it gets dark. The shadows get sharper. And I read some observers say that the birds even may stop chirping. The temperature can drop several degrees. Have you experienced this?
Definitely. Yeah. We really noticed it. Well, there were a couple of interesting things. When we went to the Winnipeg eclipse, it was wintertime, and there were these little like juncos, little hardy winter birds that were pecking around. And as the eclipse, as it got darker and darker, they went into the bushes. There were little bushes near this road, and they roosted and stopped twittering. And then we went to, we were in one in Mexico. I think that was out in the ocean. I don't know if I really felt it get cooler, but then another one that we saw in Aruba in 98. That was interesting because it was at the end of the island of Aruba next to a big oil refinery. And as it got dark, the sensors on the lighting for the refinery came on. You know how you get these, like for traffic lights and stuff, it starts to get dark, so the lights come on. Well,
That's
this would
not
happen.
good.
All of a sudden, it got dark, and all the refinery lights went on.
There are a few other phenomena that I think that are really interesting. Just before it's total, of course, the sun and the moon get closer and closer to being lined up. But just before totality, of course, there are mountains on the moon and valleys, and some direct sunlight peeks through the valleys of the moon. And then you get an effect called Bailey's beads. It's like a series of spots of direct sunlight that leak through those valleys on the moon.
Oh my gosh, I've never heard of that. Bailey's beads. Okay.
Yeah. And as the moon moves a little more, then you get just one dot, and that's called the diamond ring effect. And that's like the last direct sunlight that comes through. And then when that's done, the moon moves a little more, then it's like somebody turned off the light switch. And then it's total. And then you could take your eye protection off and look at it.
Wow. And so you said, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say another phenomenon that I forgot to mention, and we've seen this in all three of the total eclipses that we've experienced so far, is that because it's like night, but it's caused by this shadow of the moon, which is a big round shadow, and it casts this shadow on the earth. And when you look, you can turn around 360 degrees, and in all directions you see a sunset.
Wow. That's gorgeous.
Yeah, so you have this like twilight dome over, and by the way, you can see stars and planets, depending on what planets are out. And then as you look at the horizon in all directions, you see the pink, purple, yellow of a sunset.
And of course, you can't see those stars or those planets during the day normally.
Right, right. Normally you'd only see them at night. So yeah, here you get a little quick glimpse of them for a couple of minutes.
And so you've been to 3 total eclipses, but how many eclipses in all do you think?
Oh, I've seen many partials. Partials are interesting too. You have to have the eye protection, but you see the sun turn into a crescent gradually. I saw one when I was a little kid in Italy. That was my first one in 1961.
And that actually was your motivation for this.
That was my motivation, right? And then I saw.
Just a minute. Let me back up. Because there's a family story here. And that was that.
We love family stories.
His dad was going to take him to see this. They were living in Milan, and the eclipse was partial in Milan, but total in Genoa, just a few hours drive away. And initially his father was going to take him, but then decided not to. And Gauss was so frustrated by that that when we had the chance to see the eclipse in 1979, I was a willing partner. I'm like, yeah, I'll go along for that. And that's how we got started seeing them together. But I also recall seeing, partial eclipses, 2 or 3 of them when I was a kid. I remember one when I was in junior high. So that must have been in the mid-'60s sometime.
I remember one in I think it was 1964.
Yeah.
In Berkeley, California, when I lived there. And then, of course, the one that we saw in Winnipeg, a lot of my friends here in the Twin Cities have talked about seeing it as a partial.
Yeah.
In 1979. So.
But also we should emphasize that the difference between a partial and a total solar eclipse is like night and day. You see the partial eclipse. One thing that you see with both kinds is that as more of the sun's disk is blocked by the moon, the light outside takes on this kind of silvery quality. It's not as warm a color as, a regular sunlit day. And you see more and more of that. You notice that even if it's a partial eclipse, but all these other effects like the birds roosting and the sunset and the being able to see the corona, it's worth traveling a few hours out of your way to see it total rather than partial.
Well, Gauss, I know you were mentioning you felt a little guilty, if I could use that word, for not, traveling and spending more money to go to more countries. But as I'm listening to you, I mean, it seems to me that not only have you seen so many of these solar phenomenon, but you've traveled to 4 countries then, right? Canada, the U.S., Aruba, and Mexico.
Yeah, well, we also lived in China for a year, and I lived in Australia for about 3 years.
And you saw eclipses in both of those?
So, no.
No.
That's a different story. Growing up, I lived in a lot of places.
I remember that after we saw the Aruba eclipse, there was one just a year or 2 later in Turkey, and it's just like we had 2 kids at the time and didn't have the cash to fly to Turkey for 4 people to see that. So, we've done what we can that's, pretty easy to reach from where we live.
Right. And you're not, just to be clear for our listeners, you're not staying in 5-star hotels and
to
first class when you travel, right? I mean, how much do you think you spend average to travel to an eclipse?
The one in Mexico, there was a local airline that ran that flew to vacation destinations and had good fares. So the one in Mexico, we probably spent about $1,000 on airfare for the 4 of us. And then we rented a vacation condo. We actually went to Puerto Vallarta for that one. And it wasn't total in Puerto Vallarta. We had we ended up getting a little cruise boat that went out into the ocean where it was total from there. But we stayed in a vacation condo that Mexican families usually stay in when they go take a seaside vacation in Puerto Vallarta. So it was not expensive.
So you're doing this for several $100s. I mean, we're not talking about 1,000 or anything like that. It sounds like you do it very affordably.
Yeah, I mean the Winnipeg one, we drove a Volkswagen Bug and spent 2 nights in cheap motels. The Aruba one, again, we got we planned well in advance. So the nice thing is eclipses are predictable, so you know exactly when and where the next one will be. So we were able to book our tickets as soon as we could. So we got the cheapest airfare. And similarly with the hotel, when we were in Aruba, they call the high-rise hotel, which are the big resorts. And then there's what they call the low-rise hotels, which are sort of the mom and pop places. And we stayed in one of those. So I think we were spending maybe $150 a night for motels, and we were there I guess we were there about a week.
We were there a week in Aruba.
Yeah. So that was probably the most expensive Eclipse trip we took. But like this one coming up, we're just going to get in the car and we're taking camping gear and it'll probably be in the hundreds of dollars to do this trip, not the thousands.
Well, and you guys have such a depth of experience. In fact, you've seen more eclipse than anyone I've ever known, probably combined. So we definitely want to get to tips that you would give people if they want to see this eclipse coming up in August. But first, let's just run down some interesting facts here about this great American eclipse. So this is going to be the first total solar eclipse in the continental U.S. in 38 years. As you guys talked about, you went to the last one there in 1979. And then I saw from NASA that this one is going to be the first total solar eclipse whose path of totality, so that the entire sun is covered, stays completely in the United States. The first one since 1776. That's 241 years. None of us obviously were here at that time. That was the year of American independence. And so this one, everyone in the continental U.S. will see at least, right, a partial eclipse.
That's right. Yeah.
Will everybody see partial?
I think so. Well, I suppose there may be some remote corners in the northeast.
Yeah, I would have to consult a NASA map.
But that sounds right.
To determine if that's right or not. I don't know offhand, but yeah, I mean, you could pretty much drive to it from anywhere in the continental U.S.
But the other thing I heard about this eclipse is that it goes through or very close more state capital cities than any other eclipse in the past.
So basically, if someone is listening to this podcast and they've now been bitten by the same space bug that you've been bitten by, this is one of the more easier eclipses, it sounds like, to go and witness.
That's right. Absolutely. Right. Yeah.
So then let's give your decades of experience, let's put that to work here and give people tips if they want to go see this eclipse in August. What would you suggest they do? As you mentioned, you can plot out where the total eclipse is going to be. We described it a little bit. We'll put a map on voyagereport.com. But you can Google it. You can go find the map. You can figure out where the best parts will be. Even if you can't get there, as we talked about, you'll be able to see at least partial in most of the continental United States, if not all. Right. So what would you suggest if someone says, I live on the East Coast and I can possibly make it to South Carolina, or I live perhaps in the Great Plains and I can make it to Nebraska. Maybe they'll see you there as well. What would you suggest that they do? Do they plan now? Can they wait till the week before? Do they need a hotel?
Well, I would say make tentative plans for a couple of areas, and then keep an eye, when the time gets close, keep an eye on the long-range forecast so that you can move to the area that has a better chance of clear weather on that day.
So you have to be mobile and fluid.
Yeah, mobile.
Yeah,
right.
I think
flexibility, I think, is key.
Yeah, and
then also maybe don't be too worried if you can't get a hotel reservation within the path of totality. You could stay overnight in a hotel outside the path of totality, but then get up early enough in the morning that you have enough time to get to where it's total.
Yeah. Yeah, so you could you could actually stay somewhere 3 hours away from the path of totality and still get there. Definitely consult. I don't have the URLs just off the top of my head, but you can Google, path of totality for this eclipse. Or you'll have some links on your website as well. But, find out where it is. Try to stay as close to the middle of that path of totality as you can, because as you get farther away from the middle of that path, then the duration of the eclipse will be shorter. So, and if you're too far out, it won't be total. So, try to find, look at your maps and see if you can find a good cross street, maybe something that isn't super busy. I wouldn't recommend pulling over to the side of the interstate to see it. Get off and find a county road or something that, where you can safely set up and, not block traffic to see it.
Right. We want you to be safe when you're seeing it, not
Yeah.
only looking at it,
And
but where you're parked.
Well, that
yeah.
annular one, we just saw it from a wayside rest on a freeway in Indiana. That
Yeah,
was
we
just
just
fine.
pulled into a rest area.
And there
It
were
was
actually
great.
several other people there doing the
Yeah.
same thing.
Um,
Well,
It's
you have to
always
improvise, right?
yeah. And order your Eclipse viewing eye protection now. Well, I mean, there's lots of websites that offer it. We were originally given the advice use number 14 welding glass to view it. So you could go to a welding supply place, but if you go online and just look up Eclipse viewing goggles or Eclipse viewers, there's lots of places that are selling them.
Patti, I feel like we need to get you the announcer voice. Buy now while supplies last.
Right.
For the eclipse. Listeners,
Yeah.
by the way, we're curious if you're planning to travel somewhere to catch the eclipse this August. Feel free to tell us about it at voyagereport.com and any plans that you've already made or that you hope to make. And Patti and Gauss, I've got to tell you, we were just talking a moment ago that it sure seems like you were bitten by this bug early. I can't remember ever seeing a total eclipse. I did see Halley's Comet. I think that was back in the 80s when it last made its
Yep.
pass. And we were in Gauss, Colorado, of all places. And we were at my great-grandparents' ranch, and I remember looking through the telescope and seeing it and this fuzzy ball out there in space. And then when I was in 8th grade, my parents let me go to space camp, Space Academy, technically, when you're that age, in Huntsville, Alabama. And I just was fascinated. And then my parents, when I was a kid, probably... I asked them about this the other day. It was probably 4 or 5 years old. They allowed me to pick a mural, and it's that iconic shot taken from the moon looking back at the blue orb that is Earth. And so that was on one full wall of my room, the whole mural. And so everyone from school wanted to come over to my house to do homework, right? Because you had this great view of the Earth from the moon. But what is it about space, do you think, that has intrigued you? I mean, I know that we're talking about this gorgeous... these scenes of these eclipses and all that, but what do you think it is specifically about the galaxy, the stars, and all of these solar phenomenon that sort of seized your imagination?
Um, boy, Gauss is the one who wrote me into the eclipse, and I just kind of came along for the ride. But there's to me, I work in visual arts. I'm a cartographer. I make maps. That's my profession.
You help people find their way for a living.
I help people find their way. But, I started off in fine arts and then double majored. I got a geography degree and ended up making maps. But to me, it's as much as anything, it's just sort of the beauty of it. That dark sky and then that wash of the Milky Way and the pinpoint lights of the stars and planets.
Yeah, for me, it's how small it makes me feel. The Earth and the moon, and then it's just such a tiny little piece of this vast universe, and we're just such a little tiny piece of it. And I guess that's what I get from it.
Well, and eclipses have had quite the history. I mean, there have been tales written about eclipses and what they meant centuries and millennia ago, and people would try to read into what this meant. I think there was an English king that died when there was a total eclipse, and what did that mean for the kingdom and all this stuff. So it's taken on mythology and lore and a place in our history books.
Yeah.
Oh, in Chinese history, or Chinese culture, there's a way of thinking about eclipses that's really interesting. In China, they weren't very good about predicting eclipses, but they discovered that when there was an eclipse, well, first of all, they were very concerned because they thought it was a dragon swallowing up the sun. And so they would go out there with their cymbals and their drums and make noise and so forth to scare away the dragon.
It always
worked.
Wow, right? I mean, after 3 or 4 minutes, it always works.
Drop spit the sun back out, and it came back.
But the other thing about eclipses is that because they can be predicted both in the future and we could figure out when they happen in the past, we can connect eclipses to specific historical events in the distant past. And so we can say such and such happened at such and such a date, and we know exactly when it happened. And we can connect those things to historical documents that have been that have been found.
So eclipses are more predictable than the flight you may take to get there,
Absolutely.
but you still have to battle the weather because you can't be
Yeah.
guaranteed that you're going to have clear skies for
Right.
them. And so if we, for some reason, miss this eclipse, I think the next one is April 8th, 2024. And that will
Yes.
go from Maine to Texas. So that's our next shot.
Right.
But hopefully, because of the broad swath of this one, that everyone will be able to catch it if they want to. And you'll certainly be there.
Yeah, we definitely will. And
That's the plan. Yes.
one thing about all these trips that we have taken, the following an eclipse, of course we want to see the eclipse, but it's also sort of a good random destination generator. It's kind of like, well, there's an eclipse, let's go. And we went to all of these eclipses with the idea, well, you know what, if it rains or if it's, if for some reason we can't see it, we'll get something out of this trip. It'll be interesting. So,
yeah, I don't think we ever thought about going to Aruba until
no, we would.
happened. And
Right.
it was a great vacation. We had a good time there. We would have had a good time without the eclipse.
Yeah. Little disappointment, but yeah, I mean, there's always something worth seeing when you travel, even if you miss, the astronomical event.
I always like to say when I travel, I'm never really lost because I never know where I'm going in the first place. It's always an adventure and exploration. And if you look at it that way, then even if you turn down the wrong road or something doesn't happen, you explore and you discover something new that you hadn't planned on. And I always think that's one of the great things about travel and exploration. Listeners, have you ever traveled somewhere to see an eclipse or another celestial event? We want to know about it. Tell us at voyagereport.com. Email us, leave a comment. We certainly want to know. Patti Isaacs and Gauss Rescigno, I hope I said that right. You guys have both been such an inspiration, and I hope that people listening to this podcast will realize that if you can go to 2,500,000 different eclipses over 36 years, that they certainly have no excuse not to go out and see this one coming up on August 21st of this year. Thank you both for sharing your story with us. Just amazing. And Gauss, we're thinking really good thoughts about what you're battling right now. And we know you'll be with us in 2024 to see that eclipse as well.
Thanks a lot.
We really appreciate it. Thanks for coming aboard, listeners, and joining us for this podcast about traveling the globe to chase the stars. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.